Elon Musk appears to be in the process of possibly trying to set up a new third party. And this has, of course, started up a lot of ignorant talk about how third parties don't work or that we're a two party system. And this really shows a poor understanding of our system. To understand how or if a third party would work, we need to understand the mechanisms, because clearly third parties have existed and at some points have been highly effective. The party system in the United States, be it one, two, or a dozen, is really a view into the soul of the establishment. When the establishment is at peace, one party dominates. When there is minor dissension, a second party appears that's weaker than the first. When the establishment fractures, many parties appear. The US, by design, is not meant to be a multi party or even a two party system. Madison envisioned a government that was completely integrated with the establishment. He sought such a seamless incorporation that all the members of the establishment would feel so much of a part of things that factional differences would be so minimal that parties would not be formed. The most misunderstood part of the American Revolution was not as much as it being a revolt against British rule as it was caused by a massive split in the American establishment. Madison recognized this and wanted to avoid an establishment populated by insiders and outsiders. He wanted everyone in the establishment to be an insider. He failed to see what a jackass Hamilton would end up becoming. Hamilton championed the new Constitution not because he believed in it, because he saw it as a first step in consolidating massive power in central government. As such, he ended up creating a faction that was so out of step with the majority of the establishment that Madison himself helped form the first opposition party. So, did Madison inadvertently create a two party system? Not really, no. The parties that show up are a mirror of the establishment. When the establishment is in general agreement and is mostly content, we see what would be more effectively what I call a party and a half system. One party dominates, while the other sits out of power and mostly agrees, except for a handful of caveats. Following the creation of our first parties, the Democrats dominated. The Federalists struggled to alter the narrative. That doesn't mean they never put another candidate in office. It just means that they weren't the movers and shakers anymore. So the Federalist Democrat duopoly collapsed into a single Democrat party, Democratic, Republican, Democrat. There's always a little bit of conjecture where that change occurs. However, essentially, we were dealing with a sole party with just interior factions just prior to Jackson. The Jackson Revolution was populist in nature. Essentially, the establishment had become overly cozy with itself. The only way to alter things, if you only have one party, was to mobilize rank and file citizenry within that party. A populist infused party was intolerable to a portion of the establishment. The response was the creation of the American Whig Party. And clearly, it's the finest example of a half party in the one and a half party template I mentioned. Yes, it did occasionally get its candidates into the presidency and it did occasionally dominate Congress, but it really wasn't the driving force. The fundamental thing both parties agreed on at that time was that we had to compromise on slavery, and that was the only way forward. Now, the GOP is often credited as the most successful third party movement, and this is historical orthodoxy in need of a lot of revision. The GOP didn't outperform its rivals as much as their rivals imploded. The establishment split on compromise for slavery and the idea of land, how land should be used in the territories. The Whig Party imploded and a lot of its talent went off to form a new party, the eventual GOP. At the same time, there was a rise of third parties with enough similarities that the GOP and these third parties could forge a compromise coalition. The split ended up being very sectarian in nature, North and South. Considering the North had 60% of the population, this was going to be a disaster for the old parties. To that the Democrats split in half again, and then add to that the American Party tried to take to the center. It wasn't successful. Literally, we came down to a situation with the GOP was the last one standing. And to show how incredibly successful it was, their first major act was triggering a civil war. Writers really do get to write history. Throughout the rest of the 1800s, we were dealing with a dominant GOP. Now consider this. The Democrats were strongly associated with the rebellious South. In fact, when allowed to, they kind of became the party of the South. How is it that the party associated with rebellion doesn't get completely dismantled, forced to change its name, or at least not display their battlefield colors? Because for things to run in this country, the establishment must all agree on some things. The portion of the establishment that was militarily defeated had to be reinstated to its former position to ensure that the entirety of the political entity could be managed. The late 1800s was a process of the defeated portion of the establishment pushing boundaries until they transitioned from the minority view to the co equal view and finally becoming the dominant party once again. Our next major chapter in third party movements was Teddy Roosevelt's Progressive Party or Bull Moose Party. By the time this event had occurred, the bulk of the establishment had become progressive. Half Republicans were a very slow form of progressivism versus the Democrats, who wanted a progressive nation at breakneck speed. Roosevelt, however, wanted it to go almost instantaneously. He wanted a progressive revolution. His personality would not allow what he viewed as too slow a pace from either party. Although he caused his party to lose, I mean, his original Republican Party, he did usher in a stronger form of progressivism via Democratic control, and he forced the GOP to embrace progressivism in a greater way. In short, his party lost, his old party lost, but his ideology was absolutely victorious. The next major stab at third parties was the states' rights or Dixiecrat Party. Um, this was a faction of the Democratic Party that was dedicated to either slow rolling or placing the progress of race relations in amber. As a third party movement, they outperformed any current third party movement in modern times. However, they failed to impact the 1948 election in any way. The larger Democratic Party opted to treat them as a group whose issues should not be used in the broader discourse of the party. And since they were shut out. Now, this set up for future GOP gains. In 1948, the Dixiecrats were too toxic for either party. Over the next 20 years, their views would mellow sufficiently to where the GOP could give them a voice, which would end up helping put Nixon in office. Despite losing and not getting what they wanted, they eventually were scooped up to implement a shadow of their previous goals. There have been a huge batch of third parties that formed in the 70s. Now, we got some old parties that have been around forever, like the Prohibition Party, but I could say that you can't call them in any way successful. But I would say the most prolific of the third parties has been the Libertarian Party. It stands out because it can consistently get on all 50 state ballots or very close to it in high 40s, when other third parties pretty much always fail in this feat. I think the Reform Party was the only one who came close for a while. Establishment interest in this party appears to be minimal, at least until the most recent election. It's clear that the establishment has been flitting about the edges of this party because of its longevity and they being the only ones consistently able to get 50 state access. On the other hand, most part, the LP gains no traction. Thus, I suspect the LP is meant to be kind of a tool in reserve for the establishment. The John Anderson campaign was essentially fizzled astroturf. His biographies are schizophrenic at best. They all go out of their way to impress upon you that he's a deeply conservative person and very pragmatically moderate. However, his actions and affiliations are 100% progressive globalist. The fact someone with such mediocre standing got so much media attention and was included in the debates shows that the establishment wanted him there as a spoiler for Reagan. However, the results were a flash in the pan. It was a gee whiz moment for history and nothing else. It had no impact on that election or past the election. Now, the Ross Perot campaign is a bit of a conundrum. Was this establishment or was it just Ross Perot? I mean, obviously, someone with that amount of money is part of the establishment, but when it's just you can't really call it an establishment move. So, was his campaign a middle finger to Bush? Supposedly, the two of them had a long run of rivalries, banging heads together for a long time. And Perot was rich enough to do exactly that, just join the election for the sole purpose of screwing it up for Bush. However, I think it's kind of a coin toss. I think it's just as likely that this was the first stirring of the populist bloc that would help put Trump in office. I think there was a little bit more establishment behind this than just Perot. If we look at Perot, his platform pretty much had no social component at all. So he deliberately avoided anything that would be controversial. His main planks were government deficits and overspending, and that of being against the NAFTA treaty. Essentially, his campaign was an anti globalist campaign with a healthy dose of fiscal responsibility. The long term impact was minimal. The Reform Party would end up picking up uh, in his basically when Perot ran as a single entity, the Reform Party would form around him afterwards. But it rapidly lost strength with each year. But he clearly cost Bush the election and forced globalist machinations to be behind the scenes variety, not much the overt variety Bush probably would have preferred. Now, some people are claiming that MAGA is a third party. It's not. It is a populist coalition within the GOP. Populist movements are seen by the establishment as a cheat because they have the potential to be destabilizing, bringing in the riffraff and all. What Trump is doing is strongly resemblant of what Andrew Jackson did. It's no accident that Jackson's portrait is prominent at the White House. Trump very well knows what he did. So the question then becomes, what is it that Elon is doing? We don't know. Not fully yet. I mean, we're just hearing just the basic renderings of this American party. Depending on how many establishment people join him, this could be the sign of a true establishment movement to try to force MAGA to take on debt issues and more seriously develop a plan around fiscal spending. The most likely play here would be for the American Party to form as a threat in order to force change on the GOP and MAGA. Elon could have delusions of grandeur and believe he can forge a new party that is liberal, not woke, and fiscally responsible. One that could actually usurp one of the other parties or actually be a major player in things. The public feud between him and Trump may be very much real, and he may be just purely doing this to sabotage Trump. Or 4D chess mode, uh, maybe this new movement is a sledgehammer that can be wielded at the GOP progressive candidates in a way where Trump can have total deniability while at the same time taking out his worst GOP problems. And be honest, I don't have a particular lean towards any of those ideas at this moment because I don't know what Elon's doing, and I'm not 100% sure he does at this moment either. So, in the comments below, what do you think Elon is trying to do? What are his motives? Be interested in what you have to say on that. Please hit the like button, smash it even if you like. Uh, Take a look at my other titles. You'll see that I am into a whole bunch of different things. Subscribe so that you can see this stuff as I put it out. And if you know someone who might find this interesting, share it with them. Thank you for spending time with me this evening. Hope to see you again in a future video.